for our friends across the pond. Mind the gap. First of all, Charles, wonderful Fran Camp. Greatly appreciate everything that you did for that. Couldn't have happened without you. And so to the three people that are watching this that didn't attend, I just wanted to be clear that
appreciate that recognition, Nick.
I'm throwing it out. I'm throwing it out into the world that what just happened at Fran Camp couldn't have been done without Charles. And basically, if I zoom out, which that's my new term, by the way, I zoom out of things. I think it makes sense. If I zoom out, and I can go all the way back to early on, Charles and I jump on this FRANX thing. I wore a suit jacket and a button-up shirt. I actually buttoned up to the top. And I remember I actually had a TV behind me in episode 1, and I had CNN on the background. And it wasn't like, hey, Nick, thanks for giving information back to franchise. And it was like, why the fuck do you have CNN in the background? Leave me alone. Flash forward now, like all of the conversations that you and I have done. We did a test mastermind in Denver in November, and it all led up to what we did earlier this week, where we brought groups together and tried to build lifelong relationships. And I think you did a fantastic job. I mean, a lot of your clients were in attendance, and it couldn't have happened without you. I'm very much looking forward to like how FranX and Camp and Growth Club and 1851, how this whole universe starts working together. Because like if it's not evident to people that are out there, it didn't matter if it was a supplier in the room, if it was a franchisee or a franchisor, everybody is trying to figure out what's next. And I think that's everybody in life. So today's episode is, I said, identify the gap and grow your franchise. And so I don't know if you heard me say this yesterday, Charles, but Mark from Paris Baguette, formerly Paris Baguette, now of Edible, was talking about the growth journey at Paris Baguette. And he said, it was content marketing. I said, I appreciate that, but I don't think it was content marketing. I think it was that we found the gap in the marketplace of individuals that didn't understand that Paris Baguette was a franchise opportunity. Therefore, when we educated them that it was introducing a viable business. It was already a viable business based on what Mark said as his principles of strong unit performance, and then the right construction and real estate. And so I think about this gap. That's not about the tactics of PR, marketing, digital. Those are all fine, but if you don't find the gap, then you're just wasting money. And so I've been thinking about a lot about this over the last 24 hours. That I said, it's the gap closing that has to happen with the franchise. Once that's closed, I think anything is possible. Thoughts?
Yeah, the whole conversation, even before you get to the gap, is what you mentioned, which is unit economics, right? You had Paris Baguette, viable business, great unit economics, and a working system. So assumption is you have all that, then what is the gap? And I think it's correct. Everyone wastes money. So I think we all waste money. I see so many franchise brands wasting money on franchise development because they really haven't bridged that gap. And for me, that's engaging or zooming out at a macro level of what's the opportunity here, what's your positioning. And I think we all tend to overlook that or think we know it, but we don't, right? We just do on a superficial level. And that's where the brands that bridge that gap, the FSOs that accelerate the brands, they're focusing on that. They're building those bridges. And I think many business owners lose sight of that.
I also mentioned yesterday, I was thinking about like Wild Birds Unlimited. Their gap is a lot easier to close because you have to target people who love birds in order to sell a retail business that sells bird seed and bird houses and bird stuff. I'm not a bird expert. I don't know everything about birds. But you think about that, they actually, like, their brand self-closed the gap. Um, and I'm sure there's others. If we start thinking about like an automotive brand, like a Jiffy Lube, maybe, like, you probably have to be a car enthusiast. So the gap is closed a little bit because you know where to advertise. You need to advertise where at least someone is a car enthusiast and then has high net worth. You think about senior care. I would say, in my experience, 95% of people that go into senior care had some sort of experience with an aging parent, understood what the category was, and was like, I could own a business on this because it's such a deep and powerful and spiritual thing. And if I can help make end of life a little bit more comfortable, I'm interested in it. They have to have that. And then you go to like the brands that don't need to close the gap, which I would say are primarily broker driven brands, where what a home service brands, where the broker is getting, like, the gap that a broker closes is how do they align how much money a franchise buyer has to invest with the most viable brand that they have in their portfolio that they can invest in. But in that sense, the gap that they're closing is connecting investable assets into an asset, and that the asset doesn't have to be as passionate. So, like, I think a lot about this is in the closing of the gap, you have to figure out how are you going to spend the money as tight as possible. Because if I took a pool, even we worked with Dairy Queen for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. I think their all-in development budget was $100,000, and they wanted 100 deals for that. Now they had the benefit of being Dairy Queen, but it wasn't like they were pouring tons of cash into it. It was like just they were maximizing their opportunities. Like, PR for them is fairly easy. It's like Dairy Queen is growing. People are like, "Ooh, I love Dairy Queen." So I'm thinking about this gap close, and, like, I mean, for our business, there are certainly gaps. Gaps are in what our competitive landscape says about us, and gaps are, you and I have talked a ton about this, is, are we giving a clear positioning about our business, which I've worked really, really hard to continue to try to lessen that gap. But I know that we have gaps, and if we can do that too, then maybe we grow our business too, you know? So anyway, it's been top of mind since it came up yesterday at FranCamp.
Well, look at FranX. I think there's gaps there, right? There's some lack of clarity. And it turns out, again, from FranCamp, we had great conversations, and Ken Parsons brought up a great point when we were discussing from Brothers Just Do Gutters, that as a franchisor, like a big game changer, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, was having a systematic approach to franchise sales. And that, I think, is a big gap for so many brands. And sometimes that's why they need to lean in on brokers, because they don't have that systematic approach. And then also, to Mark's point about content, well, I mean, having that systematic approach means you're generating the content and telling that organic story. So a lot of it, comes from within, and there's just so many opportunities out there. I think there's no better time than now, and probably tomorrow and a year from now as time evolves. I mean, all of the digital media out there, all the ability to tell stories and leverage. I think you need to look within to close those gaps, like really deep. And in fact, I get a lot of comments. I make our FranX Masterclass available to all our clients, and I know you do. And I received a comment the other day, and again, it's on branding, brand positioning, your uniques, your transformation you offer franchisees. And the feedback I got from a pretty big company too was, hey, Charles, not only did this help us on our brand positioning, but it was a great resource for our team in strategic planning. And so I just wonder and challenge the 2 or 3 people who are watching this, and myself, which I am. I just lost power. I would have showed you all my notes, secret notes. But spend the time diving deep before you start deploying any strategies. Because chances are, if you don't spend the time diving deep into your business and your values and what you're doing, you're not going to find the right tools to bridge the gap. So like go within and let's really assess the tools you need. And for
So
me, it's brand positioning, story. The marketing and PR, but if you're not driving organically through your organization, you're missing one of the biggest opportunities before AI takes over and kills us all.
there it is. I think it's a new drinking game. I mean, we're only gonna have to take one drink per FranX when you say something off the wall, but
Okay.
we'll have shots waiting here and out. So a few things there. I think one, what you said, what the message that Ken said is a gap that most franchisors have. How do you systematize the franchise sales process? And I even I've talked with brands that are like, our time from inquiry to close is 6 months. I'm like, why? And they're like, that's how long the candidate takes. I go, so do you give them a blueprint on day one that says, here's how you're going to close in the next 90 days? They're like, well, no. I go, right. So you got to change, like, that's a gap, like close the gap there. And then what Mark said, and this is when he got in Paris Baguette, they're selling 10 units a year. When he leaves, they're selling 150 units a year. Like, what he did is he said, all right, first, let's close the gap. I'm going to just revisit all these leads. They're called dead leads, but I'm sure there's someone in there who could be interested in buying, and he found deals in there. Then he said, all right, now that we've signed a deal, what happens next? We got to be buttoned up on real estate. And his advice was, if you're brick and mortar, do not let the franchisees select real estate. Even if you came back with three options for them that you've approved, you take the lead because you have the data to make the decision on what could best impact them from a sales standpoint. So he did that, the real estate selection, and then the construction and how do we speed this up to make sure that we're efficient in it so that we can get these units open, which in turn is going to make the business more money off of royalty. He systematized beyond lead generation. At that point, like, and he said this, his model was, and he said he's doing the same at Edible. He's coming in, he's evaluating he called it a 7-step process to see what do we have in place. And then he's just fitting it into his widget so that that's in place. Now, when he goes markets the brand, he's prepared for it. And I'm talking about 2 sizable brands. So it's not like you can't, like, even if you didn't go all in early on, there's still the opportunity to go backwards and go all in later,
When Mark, and I appreciate that you added context and said, hey, Mark's giving credit on content, but also it was just an education process. But what do you feel was the content that was helping to fuel the conversions of the sort of the dead leads that get resurrected, and also getting the brand to a point where it's scaling, it's gaining that momentum? What was how would you qualify or characterize that content?
So I do it in a few ways. Let me add one more gap without a ton of color on it. Another gap is, and we talked about this at FranCamp, that if you go back to day one before you get into franchise and ask yourself, did you know what franchising is? The answer is no. And so to the franchise buyer right now, you go into their shoes, they don't know what franchising is. And so nobody's taken the time to educate them what franchising is. And so with Paris Baguette, you had a beautiful brand. Like if you walk past one in New York City, you just see beautiful products. The cakes look amazing. It is operationally challenging because all of that product is made in-house daily. Like, it is all made inside that unit. And so what we had to do was really lift up we are a franchise. And then 2, this is how franchising with us works. And part of that was talking to Mark about his process that he puts in place. Because if you think about Paris Baguette, they were heavily in the Asian markets. Kmart's, or not Kmart's, what are they called? H Marts. It's like Kmart. H Marts. They were in predominantly Asian markets. And so what I said, the gap that we had to close was the white American cowboy, the franchisee that is so present in franchising, had no idea that Paris Baguette was an opportunity. And so even though they have 4,000 global locations, the content had to educate the buying audience that before you go buy a Popeyes or Papa John's, look at a Paris baguette. And so that was step one. Now that we started saying that we are a franchise, now we got to explain to them what is better of us than another opportunity, not a competitor, but a similar investment. And so, like, I've said this many times, I think a lot of franchises want to say we're looking for people that are passionate about our product. And the gap there is, I'll be passionate about your product once I know I can actually build wealth for my family. Like, every franchisee wants to take care of their family in making this big leap into franchising. And so even though like the details were there for Paris Baguette, like they had the tools, they weren't deploying them, and then they weren't amplifying them. So it was position the brand, build the buzz, amplify the buzz, and build predictability in the funnel. That's it. And then it took off because it was already a sound business, and the business continued to climb in how sound it was, because every time you open up a new unit in a new market where you weren't in the suburbs of America, sales continued to climb, people get more excited, and they were operationally already there. They already knew how to operate a productive unit because of what they did in Edison, New Jersey, where it's, you know, a north of $5 million restaurant.
Right. And if you're not bridging those gaps, you're just spending dollars and you're not getting ROI.
That's right.
Yeah.
See, we got new fans.
No. And Lindsay was at FranXers, so.
She was at FranXers. Look, I mean, I think this is probably the biggest life advice that we could probably give to ourselves. You constantly try to find what gap you have in your life, or the gap in who you are as a human, the gap that you are as a father, the gap that you are as an employee, gap that you are as an employer. And those that are willing to look at the gaps and say, how do I just get a little bit better, close that hole a little bit, are the ones that continue to, you know, work through life and try to chase what equals happiness a little bit stronger. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. The advice I keep giving myself, which I think is important for entrepreneurs, is like, even though we're focused on that gap, I think it's helpful to reflect backwards too, because you had gaps in the past that you overcame, and, you know, really reflect on those wins, because there's a lot of positivity there. I keep telling that to myself because I'll tell you why. Because I'm always focused on the future and the next thing, and why is this not working perfectly? And Brian Linser has to keep reminding me about, you know, the gap in the game, and not, you know, and taking for granted, so to speak, what we've overcome and all the progress that's been made. So I keep telling this to myself.
If Brian made it this far in here, he's going to feel nice and warm and fuzzy that you said that.
Yeah, he did not.
Hey, Brian, I know you're not on here, but thanks for watching. FranX.